Scott, for everybody, if you haven't either seen my introduction, for my mastermind guys, I did a voice memo yesterday to talk about Scott. Scott is a founder of Customer Care Measurement Consulting, CCMC. He did a podcast interview with me. So if you like what you hear here, you could go get that podcast. I'm sure he'll tell us how to get a copy of the customer rage study, which is something that you can get as a free resource. Before we wrap up, Scott helped us at Preferred Warranties to do a scientific study of many of our customers, clients, many of the car dealers we dealt with to understand why do dealers kind of let you in the door? Why do they switch from a different supplier to you? Why would they leave? If they do have a unsatisfactory experience, which we had quite a few of those, we were denying claims at times for consumers saying, hey, we aren't going to pay for your engine for one reason or another. So there was risk of people leaving us, right? Scott helped us dig into all that, doing surveys. And the important thing for me, and I think what you'll learn about Scott, the data and the surveys and how he cut the data, how he looked at it, which of course was informed by all of his years of experience, was really important. But then there was just the like gut level who he is, like what he's learned that wasn't even dependent on the actual data from the dealers. We learned things. We learned things that we were able to then put into action. And so on that basis, Scott, I'm glad you're here. Um, Given that it's a small group, you heard a little bit from Aaron. Do you mind maybe take it from there, but then just connect with the other guys here, give them a second to tell you why they're here, what they might want. Are you cool with
Yeah,
that?
why don't we start with that as opposed to me talking? Because I have plenty to say, but I'd welcome the chance to hear a little bit more about a thumbnail of each of the folks on the call. Sure.
Great. So yeah, Jamie, Wes, just who are you? Why, what are you hoping to learn? What's your business? That kind of thing.
I'm Jamie
And we have
Connell.
some other people I see in the background. So, but if you're not on camera, you don't get to talk to Scott. That's how it works.
Yeah.
I'm Jamie Connell. I own Connell Funeral Home in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I'm here. This is intriguing to me because customer feedback is just so important, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. But the offering of folks that we serve giving real feedback that can help us create a better experience is what it's all about. So thanks for being here.
I can honestly say I've worked in virtually every single industry. I'm not sure we've ever done a survey in a funeral home sector. But I did talk with one cemetery group probably 10, 12 years ago who was interested in seeking feedback from people that were their customers. So
Yeah.
good to have you along, and fresh off reading a New York Times article, I think it was last weekend or maybe the previous weekend, about the disruption in your industry and the things that
There's a
are
lot of disruption going on right now.
yeah, moving from smaller, maybe single or two, maybe three funeral homes to corporate funeral home settings. So I've read a little bit about it, but very interesting. Thank you, Jamie. Who's next?
Thank you.
I'll go. I suppose I'm here primarily because I know Wayne brings good content. So I guess I salute is this way. Salute to you, Wayne. I with our business, we're trail builders, and what's cool about our business is that the job the feedback we get is that this is so much better than we ever imagined. So if I can, I haven't really leveraged positive feedback very well, and so I'm interested in how we can leverage the positive feedback because it's pretty rare that we get negative feedback.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think they're about things like understanding how you can exploit the value that you provide, and understanding as well from a competitive standpoint, how you fare. Although I'm not a big fan of competitive kinds of work, as we'll talk about. I really am grounded in the notion of continuous improvement, but a competitive viewpoint certainly has a role. And in the scenario that you mentioned, not just knowing that you get positive feedback, but how does that compare against your competition, whether that competition is explicit or more covert, meaning you don't have any direct competitors, but there's other things that people might invest in rather than going with your business. So those are just a couple of quick top of mind thoughts. We'll see if we can't talk a little bit more about that in the detail. So thank you.
Our biggest competitor is the kitchen remodel.
The kitchen remodel.
So
thankless things, kitchen remodeling and bathroom remodeling. I'm not sure which is worse. Who's next?
Jude and then Wes is what I saw.
Yeah, okay.
I'm Andrew Papelos. I work for How Rescue. I'm the service manager. Currently, we have about nine service vans on the road. Like Randy said, we get a lot of positive feedback, really no negative feedback. And I know there got to be negative feedback out there, just kind of trying to feel that what's some of the negative things that maybe people don't want to express or talk about. A lot of vendors come to us wanting to sell their product because of our service team and just word of mouth how well we do, and we hold our standards pretty high. We offer 27 emergency service callbacks. I stress everybody calling customers back right away. Be truthful, answer the phones. So we do really well, but I'm sure there's negative things that we just don't see that we can maybe nip in the butt before it happens.
I think there are, and certainly I know a little bit about you all. I've met a colleague of yours named RJ.
Yep.
Do I have that right? And
yes.
I visited your offices, and I may have even met you on that visit. This would have been, I don't know, several months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
I work out of the PA office. He's the Ohio office.
I see. Well, then I didn't meet you, but I'm meeting you now. Thank you. Nice to have you along, Andrew. Is there one more person, maybe?
Wes.
Yeah, I'm Wesley. I have a marketing business and in digital marketing, and I get feedback from clients, but I feel like I'm always second guessing it because there might be like, everything's great and look good. But I feel like there's like in the back of my head, I'm like, I've heard this before with clients that have been for years, and then they tell me something that's been bugging them for 6 months, and I'm like, wish I knew that in month 1, so I wasn't doing it.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the so far the folks that have introduced themselves, a lot of the emphasis I think is around how do you get more authentic feedback. Not that the positive feedback isn't authentic, but there are certain social scientific principles that we'll talk about that are essential, at least in a survey mode of feedback, in order to ensure that you're getting sincere, well-rounded, across the end-to-end customer experience feedback from those surveys, which is what I'll be talking about in some detail this morning. So thank you, Wes. Was Wes our last introducee?
Did Aaron go? Okay.
Aaron did. Aaron works with Scott Colin, Wes. Aaron is his sales guy, marketing
Gotcha.
VP, sales marketing director, all that. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
He's got to grow this thing.
Well, it's
right.
It's good to be here. What a privilege. I've really enjoyed the podcast that Wayne and I did. And of course, as he alluded to, we've been friendly for, must be more than a decade now since we worked together when he was at Preferred Warranties. And what I've always admired about Wayne is his ambitiousness and his thoughtfulness. I mean, those are two things that are hard to come by, and even harder to come by, I think, in the fast-paced digital world in which we live and the short attention spans. And Wayne's sort of still a Renaissance man in terms of some of the things that are really, really important for being successful in business. So I'm really happy to be part of this next part of sharing with you. And I thought I might begin, though, with just a little introduction of myself. We all have our own stories, and I'm not part of your group, and I'm sure you've all told your own stories about how you got started in the business, and some of the inflection points that were part of your own journeys. As for myself, as you might see in this visual of the old kind of spaghetti bowl, it was a really circuitous journey for me to get to 22-ish years ago, founding CCMC. And of course, our business, as you've probably figured out by now, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it shortly, is helping companies get full ROI, get full value for listening to, but more importantly, acting on the feedback that they get from customers. That'll be a principle, best practice that I hope you'll walk away from this. And if you remember nothing else, that it's almost more important to act than it is to listen. By example, I can't count on all my hands and toes and other body parts the number of times I have companies that come to me and they're more interested in how frequently that they're going to measure. Are we going to measure monthly or quarterly? Are we going to measure in real time? Than they are, how are we going to distill, digest, and act on the data and feedback that we get? And so action is a real important part of that. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about it. But in any event, my journey looks something like this. And I'm not going to spend, I'm just sort of beginning to experiment with some new ways of talking about how I got here and where I'm going in the future. And you can see the legend down the right-hand side. I'm not going to talk about all of those. I just want to say by way of introduction that much of our business practice, maybe at least in the spirit, emanates from some of my own experiences and background that you see represented here. And there's a couple that I think are especially relevant to today. The first of those is by training, I'm a social scientist. So, and that didn't come easy either. I kind of wandered into that part of life as well. I was a student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I was originally wanting to be a journalist, but I flunked the journalism usage test, which was the screening test to get into being able to be a journalist. I flunked it twice, despite taking 4 years of high school English. And so that went out the door. I was not going to be a sports journalist. So then I said, well, I should be in media, and I wanted to be maybe a sports broadcaster or a filmmaker. And so I enrolled in the communications area at UW-Madison and started making films. And I know we have one person here that had a post-production company, but let's just say that I was much better at maybe watching films than I was at making them. It didn't work out so well. But what I had some competence in, I guess, almost like Rain Man, if you've seen the movie Rain Man, where they drop the bunch of matchsticks and he counts them and there's 246 or whatever the number is. I was pretty good at taking a complicated set of data, a complex set of data, and trying to make sense of it from a practical sense, not from an academic sense, although I did a fair amount of academic publishing and research and so forth. But it was something that was challenging. It was something I sort of enjoyed. And truth be told, it was probably the only way I thought I could make a living once I graduated. So I went to graduate school as well, studied for a year. My mother died. I dropped out. I came back and spent 2 more years pursuing that PhD in interpersonal and organizational communication, but ultimately failed to get the degree. I sort of again hit an inflection point in my own life. My father had died when I was 17. My mother died when I was 24. I had brothers and sisters. And I said, what am I going to do with my life? And so I left graduate school and I started at the Better Business Bureau in Milwaukee sometime around 1988 or in that rough area, and was a mediation arbitration coordinator for a service called Autoline. Autoline was the alternative dispute resolution mechanism for all of the major manufacturers to use to avoid litigation. And I spent about a year in Milwaukee and then moved on to the National Council of Better Business Bureaus, where I did some of those same things, but working with manufacturers, working with problem cases for consumers, et cetera. And as I was growing at the National Council of Better Business Bureaus, they were very interested in becoming more relevant, obviously creating new revenue streams. And so I started doing some work in the program or product development area. And as I was doing that research, I began to come across all kinds of data from a study that had been done in the middle 70s for the White House Office of Consumer Affairs. And lo and behold, it just happened to be a firm that was located in Washington, D.C., and I was in Arlington, Virginia with the council. And so I got together with one of the founders of TARP, is the name of the firm that you see represented here. And we talked a bit about his data, and about 40 minutes into the conversation, he stopped and he paused and he looked at me in a kind of deadpan way and said, "You want me to hire you to work at TARP, don't you?" And I said, "Well, I hadn't thought about it, but now that you mention it, I think you're right. I think I do want to work at TARP." And so off I went and became a consultant where I spent, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 years, both in the U.S., TARP U.S. as a principal consultant. And then I was a managing director at TARP Europe because they had a global practice, and spent about 3 years there, came back to TARP. TARP sold. My business partner from CCMC, who I'll mention in a minute, who joined me at CCMC, made a bundle, as did his partner, who was also at CCMC now. But we founded CCMC after I got bored and tired jumping through the hoops of a just acquired company that really couldn't find itself. So it was more, I would say, fear. I must have been crazy, right? I had just come back from the UK. I had 2 kids that were under the age of 5 and a baby on the way. And I said, "Oh, I don't know. This isn't really working out. I guess I should start my own business." And so off we went. And in 2002-ish, we created CCMC, myself and Mark Grainer, who was one of those founders of TARP. But social scientific background, I think, is essential. It's a part of the work that we do. It should be a part of how you go about building your own feedback mechanisms from customers. And I would say that maybe the other 2 things I'd underline as I was describing some of my personal background is lots of failure. Whether it's journalism usage tests, or dropping out of graduate school. And I think that's a common theme probably of many of your own stories, that an entrepreneur's life is one that demonstrates resilience in the face of setbacks. And certainly that was part of my story as well, in some of the at least top line ways that I've shared with you today. And then the last of the 3 things I'd mentioned that's maybe embedded within this this story of growth and formation is one of being blessed with lots of mentors across all of the different places and seasons of life. There's always been someone that I was able to rely on and learn from, and someone to support whatever that ambition might have been. And for that, I'm really grateful. So anyway, that's sort of just maybe a wandering through how we got to BCCMC. As I said, we just celebrated a couple of years ago our 20th anniversary. We come out of the pedigree of that firm I mentioned called TARP. TARP, the study that I was referring to, which in the industry is often called the White House study. You've heard many of the snippets that have come from that body of work, both from the White House study and some of the proprietary work afterwards for Coca-Cola and a number of other companies. An unhappy customer tells twice as many people about their bad experience as a happy customer tells about their good experience. It costs 5 times as much to acquire a new customer as it does to hold on to an existing customer. Any and all of those kinds of things all came out of the White House study. And so the other thing that I think is unique about our company is, in effect, we have a 50-year framework that we built for how to think about and create feedback mechanisms that make a difference in businesses. And I'll talk about some of the sorts of business we worked with in just a minute. But I think it's important that one look at the work you're doing to get feedback as being more than just a transactional tick the box activity. It has to be grounded to some degree in rigorous social science, sort of a fact-based, data-centric kind of approach, and that's really what I think one factor that differentiates CCMC from the many others that are in the market doing some of the same things that we do. I'll often say that our vocation is customer experience surveys. That's one form of feedback. There are many others. There's social media, there's complaints, there's conversations that you have in passing with your customers. But surveys are a very unique and important part of any feedback system, and that's our core competency. But I'll then say, usually, that our mission is much deeper than that. And our mission is really to help our clients become better decision makers about where they're going to allocate their finite resources to create that better customer experience. We are notoriously, coming out of my social scientific background, and this was some of the areas that I focused on in graduate school, we are notoriously bad decision makers. If you look at all of the data in decision science and economics, it all talks about decision biases. And I think I saw one reference in the last couple of years that there's something like 170 different decision biases. And it's not the case that just if you simply do a survey and get some data that you're going to correct or compensate for all of those common decision biases. But certainly, data gives you a big leg up, or at least reinforces some of your gut feel and your intuition, something I'm going to talk about more yet this morning. But the idea is we're much more about being a trusted advisor to our clients with a very unique set of data that empowers them to make business decisions that have a much higher probability of being successful, at least when it comes to the customer experience. We work with all kinds of companies. You can see a snapshot of some of the logos and brands that we've worked with over the years. This is sort of a short list, but it's a diversified client portfolio. It works in what we're going to talk about works in every industry. It works for all different sizes of companies, albeit many of these companies are on the larger side. Probably 2/3 of the clients we've worked with are in the business to business sector, the rest in business to customer. And as you can see here, again, what I call blue chip sorts of companies that really understand and thrive on getting as much feedback and then acting on that feedback as they possibly can. Okay, that's a bit about me and a bit about the place that we're coming from in terms of the work we do in the market and the types of clients we have, et cetera. But I want to say that there's maybe 6 or 5 things that I would highlight in our short time together today. And they're organized around the notion of transforming the customer experience, this idea of having a radically positive impact on the customer experience through the process of feedback. And these 5 things, I think, are as good a place to start as any. They're not exhaustive. You could probably find some others. You could probably find some different words to describe them. But I think they're a pretty good representation of, if I look at market leaders in the area of customer feedback from a survey perspective, all of them would share these guideposts, these principles of how they go about thinking of and then acting to create survey as an important feedback component in their toolkit. So the first of these, which you'll hear about, listen with a fact-based, data-centric approach. That means going beyond anecdote. It means being a little bit more closer to the social science part of this kind of work than it is to the informal, anecdotal kind of feedback. You know, a lot of times we'll hear companies say, I'm out talking to customers every single day. Don't you think that they would tell me if there was something wrong? And particularly in a B2B environment, that's probably misguided, because the last thing that many business-to-business customers want to do is tell the person that they rely on and work with every day bad news about how they're going about creating or providing the customer experience. And so listening with a fact-based, data-centric approach, in this case, kind of concentrating on surveys, is a really important part. A second thing we're going to talk about is the sort of annual Do You Love Us survey and how that is not going to get the job done, and the importance of going beyond NPS or Net Promoter Score and really looking more broadly at the entire customer experience. And that is the basis for how you're going to discern what are the principal areas that are going to drive the greatest advocacy, the greatest loyalty, the greatest positive word of mouth, any and all of those kinds of things. You have to be attentive, not just to single measures, as we'll see. Adopting the principle of continuous improvement. I talked a bit at the outset about competitive surveys, for instance, have their place in your toolkit as well, but you can't go wrong with the what I'd call the Toyota principle of continuous improvement, Kaizen. It's such a critical philosophy of how you should think about collecting your feedback and acting on it. I'm going to show you a case study of a particular client we've worked with that I think is the example, the prototypical example of perfection when it comes to this kind of activity. Number 4, take systemic actions. The number of times we work with companies where they look at the survey data and they want to go impulsively fix the 1 or 2 customers that had a big problem. Again, a common reaction in many companies we work with, but I'm going to differentiate that from looking for root cause and taking systemic action to prevent problems from happening and to set your company up for success in the long run when it comes to improving customer experience. And then finally, I'm going to pivot and talk a bit about that customer rage survey, which we started about 20 years ago. But the emphasis I'm going to place is on the number 1 key driver of customers who have problems. Over the 35-ish years I've been doing this work globally in every industry, when we talk about problem handling, complaints, trying to solve problems, the number 1 driver is, did you give the customer what he or she wanted? And I know that's a very loaded phrase, but I'll talk more a bit about the nuance of it when we get to that point. So these are the things I want to just sort of introduce today as you go about considering your own ways of getting feedback from customers, at least when it comes to surveys. So let's begin here with the notion that it's not uncommon to solicit customer feedback. In fact, if you look at the studies represented here, this one from McKinsey, almost every company has some kind of CX, means customer experience, by the way. Almost every company has some form of survey-based metrics. It may be simple, it may be complex, but almost everybody has them. But surprisingly, most company executives that sit in your seat aren't happy with what they have. And in fact, only 15%, as you can see here. And when McKinsey asked these companies why are they disappointed with the survey insights that they get, the answers they gave, the 3 biggest answers they gave are represented here, which is 1, the surveys don't really tell me what the key drivers are that make the most fundamental difference in customer loyalty and satisfaction. Number 2, those survey insights, nice as they might be, don't really give me an understanding of what's the payback from investing in and improving in any given area. And number 4, these data aren't especially useful in terms of giving purpose to our action to improve the customer experience. And so we start with the idea that while everybody's doing it, most people are not thrilled with their return on investment, if you will, in that feedback process. One of the reasons for that, how many is, I can't really see everybody, but if I asked you if you knew what NPS was, I hope you do. NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. It's the darling in the boardroom of most companies. It is a simple question that is an 11-point scale where you ask people, would you recommend us, 0 to 10? And they classify people into 3 groups: promoters, those who gave a 9 and a 10, passives, who gave something like an 8 or a 7, and then detractors, who give a 6 or less score. And the way that they calculate the Net Promoter Score, if you're not familiar with it, is they take the promoters and they subtract out the detractors, and that gives you a score between -100 and +100. And the founders of this particular measure out of Harvard have suggested that you really only need to ask one other question on your survey, and that's a follow-up to the recommend question, which would be something like, tell us more about why you gave us this rating. And they believe that businesses and managers are smart enough to be able to use that kind of feedback to make a fundamental difference in their business. It's come under a lot of attack. NPS has. It's been around for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, although people have asked the recommend question for as long as I've been in business, maybe in a slightly different way. But it's come under a lot of attack for what I think are very important and legitimate reasons. There's nothing wrong with asking the recommend question, but I think there are a couple of other fatal flaws in that philosophy. One is NPS, according to some studies, is not a very good predictor of your future business performance, which it espouses to be. There, in this particular study I'm showing you here, you can see that there were a lot of other ways, a lot of other metrics that were better predictors of future business performance. So it's, from just a pure predictive accuracy standpoint or predictive value standpoint, it doesn't have as much to offer maybe as it says. The Net Promoter Score, if you're familiar with it, the way I was describing it, promoters, passives, and detractors, or neutrals, another word for passives, it's in the traditional NPS, the orthodox NPS approach. What it says is that passives are not really important, and that sort of strikes against common sense, because there's a lot of people that are not going to be on each end of the continuum, really positive, really negative. There's a lot of people in the middle. But NPS theorists probably are not looking at data like these. These data come from, as you can see here, 5 or so B2B studies we've done and B2C. And it's just one example. We could probably pull a lot more that would have the same result. But as you look at the who these promoters, passives, and detractors are, you would probably disagree with the NPS theory, which says passives really don't matter. Passives are a lot more like detractors. If you look at, for instance, let's just take the first measure, percent very satisfied with the company overall. Not surprisingly, promoters, people that are going to recommend you, are very favorable. 75% on average across these studies said they were very satisfied overall. And if you go to the opposite end of the continuum, it's not surprising that detractors, people that wouldn't recommend you, are not really satisfied overall. But look at the passives. Only 13% would be very satisfied. So there's, and you could do the same thing with each of the other key measures that I mentioned here. The point being that a lot of times, if you're using a traditional simple measure like NPS, you've got to do a fair amount of digging around in your own data to better understand at least these cohorts of promoters, passives, and detractors. Passives are a lot closer to detractors, which is another sort of problem with the NPS approach. And then finally, I would just say this, that I mentioned that NPS is only, at least from a theoretical standpoint, supposed to be 2 questions. Would you recommend, and why did you give us that recommend rating? It's not going after any of the key drivers. And you'll see in a moment just how important it is to have surveys that are much more representative of the entire customer experience, all aspects of how you are interacting with and doing business with your customers is necessary in order to do some of the more fancy predictive modeling that tells you what those key drivers are, what their impact is, and what you can earn from improvement. So I guess the first sort of capsule of our conversation is around, you need to probably err on the side of being a little bit more social scientific about how you're getting your feedback from customers. You probably need to, while you might have a North Star metric like an NPS or an overall satisfaction, those are nice to have, but you need to have a lot of other measures that go deeper into the customer experience so that you can better predict which of those things, if I were to act on them, is going to show the greatest return on investment in terms of either overall satisfaction or NPS. The second capsule of our commentary here is around the notion of action. And I think that taking action on survey insights is an acquired skill. You can see here from some other studies done by Accenture and Forrester that for the most part, the majority of companies and people that are in positions of responsibility for improving the customer experience, for the most part, they're relying more on gut feel than they are data. Now, it's a small majority, 51.7, 52%, but 1 out of every 2 business decision makers is flying blind without credible, rigorous, but practical data about what matters most to customers and which things will return the most to them for their action. Now, alongside that, the Forrester study, I think, is particularly interesting. They looked at why or what kinds of challenges executives would experience with their voice of the customer programs that would include surveys. And these were the most common answers given by those executives as to what challenges they have in insights and converting those insights into something meaningful. I like the one on the bottom in particular. We don't act enough on the data. 1 out of every 4 executives believes that we spend a lot of time collecting data and far too little time acting on it. And if you go up a couple more, you'll see that even when they do act, it takes far too long to act on the data. So it's not very common in our work that we see companies have a formal process in place to engage the rest of the organization in the feedback loop, and more particularly in getting their expertise that you use to create the actions that are going to improve the customer experience. More often than not, action is we're doing that, or we already did that, or yes, we got this feedback and we've got this handled. It's one of complacency. So I think it's really critical, if you're going to go to the trouble of collecting feedback and all of the effort required to convert those insights into practical, tangible things you can do in the business, that you have some kind of formality and intention around taking action as well.
Scott.
Yeah.
Scott, I'm just sometimes good to like pause and so back on Net Promoter Score, and the basic question of Net Promoter Score is, yes, I think most of us have heard of it. Basic question is how likely are you to recommend us to somebody else? And what I like practically, I hear you saying if it's not a 9 or a 10, then they're a detractor and it's probably a no-go. So we need to be shooting for a 9 or 10. I'm wondering, Jamie and Dude, just quick, do you ask families? I know we've talked about the discomfort of asking families who've had a funeral, like how likely are you to recommend us? Do you ask that basic question? And do you ask that, Dude, of your customers, how likely are they recommend you to another fire department?
Well, the issue is a little bit is when we perform the work, there's usually nobody there. So it's sometimes they don't see exactly what you're doing. They just know you show up and they don't have an issue and they feel you did a good job. That's
But
the
you
thing
don't
that we
ask. You
missed.
don't have a formal process to like survey people.
No, actually, what back to our little meeting this morning, I'm trying something new with the team that I want to reach out to some of these customers personally as the manager and ask him how the experience was with How Rescue. Is there anything that we can do better? Kind of a one-on-one things to some people.
Got it. So that's your
Because
current state. That's your current
yeah,
state.
yeah.
Jamie, how about you?
We send surveys out to the families about 2 weeks after services, and we are asking that question: would you recommend, or how likely are to recommend? I think it's 1 through 5. I think is the number system.
It's another one.
There's somewhere between, I want to say, 8 and 10 questions, I think, on that survey.
You know what your current net promoter score is?
It's in the 90s.
90% plus. Okay, good. Scott, it's just helpful to me to have an idea of what people are doing.
For sure. The just by way of example, the kind of survey that Wayne did at Preferred Warranty would have obviously a recommend question. I don't remember what was net promoter. It has an overall satisfaction question. But the end-to-end customer and dealer experience, because we did both a dealer and a customer survey for Preferred Warranties, would have had somewhere between, no less than 25 and as many as 50 specific attributes that you're asking how satisfied people are across the entire experience. Because, of course, the greater the granularity in what you're asking, the greater the prescriptive value of the insights that you're getting back. You know, if I have a question that says, how satisfied were you with our customer service? And and let's pretend that you had a lot of dissatisfaction with the customers. What does that mean? What does the word customer service mean? Everybody would probably have a slightly different definition of, or what they would point to for explaining how they were going to improve customer service. So by contrast, if you had, let's say, 5 or 6 specific measures about customer service in your survey, you'd have much more directionally, prescriptively valuable data to unpack what does customer service mean to the customer in this particular case. But anyway, I digress. This is the picture of perfection when it comes to transformation of the customer experience and the adherence to some of the things that we've been talking about. This is a client of ours. They have a business. It's more business to business than it is business to consumer. Although, admittedly, one of the two segments here that are represented could be considered a little bit of B2C, but it's mostly B2B. It's a global business. This happens to be the part of the operation in the United States. It's in financial services. It has, I'll just say, a retail network attached to it in the form of dealers. It's in the transportation area as well, transportation financial services. And you can see as you look across this, and if we had more time, we'd kind of do this a little bit more interactively, but I want to make sure we make good use of the time we have left. So I'm going to kind of plow through describing some of the things that you're seeing here that make this so perfect. One of the things that makes it perfect is year in, year out, regardless of what was happening in this company, it was critical that they listen to the voice of their customers and then, of course, take action. More to be said about that in a second. But they went through 2 financial crises during this period of 20 years that you see here. They changed CEO and leadership probably 4 or 5 times. They moved a workforce of thousands of people across the United States. They installed a brand new IT infrastructure. And so, like you and like me, there were many, many changes in their business, but what they refused to do is take their foot off the pedal. They always wanted the feedback. The feedback became the narrative for the sort of ambitious, fueled growth of their business. What's not shown here is a syndicated study that they would participate in every year within their industry, which would tell them who was number one in their industry with one of these segments. And if across those 20 years they finished first in their study, I think 16 times, they tied for first 2 other times, and 2 other times they didn't finish first. But I guess my point is, if you look at their financials and you look at their competitive stature, they were doing the hard work through this kind of survey insight and action that we've been talking about. And these external measures, both at a financial level and a competitive basis, would be a validation of the level of excellence that they had aspired to and that they were achieving. So, one fact of those companies that are market leaders in the customer experience is they always listen, even if they know the feedback may not be positive, even if they know that there are going to be downturns, which there will be, which is maybe a second point of customer experience leaders. If you look across this curve, the curve is sort of linear, at least from the beginning to the end, but their journey to excellence did not come without setbacks, and there were plenty of them. A third thing I hope you see in this is that there's an increased consistency in the customer experience across the two segments. So that line that was much more separate when they first started thinking about doing business this way became much closer together, each of the two segments. So they became a more cohesively customer-driven organization, would be another way to think about it. And then if you sort of look at where they started and where they ended, these are remarkable gains from start to finish. But the continuous improvement, if you did the math, you would find that on average, one of these segments grew about 1.25% per year, and the other grew at about half that rate, about 0.75. So you have to be in it for the long term and recognize, if you've ever read the book Good to Great and are familiar with that author's conceptualization called the flywheel effect, where after a while you begin to pick up momentum, and that flywheel that's real heavy to push at first all of a sudden becomes a lot easier when it picks up steam. And so the game of continuous improvement is really about trying to get on that flywheel. And the way that we found, and this company in particular got there and achieved these remarkable gains, is first of all, knowing what matters most to customers, that science, that key driver analysis, and then secondly, having an action planning process in place. If you look at this curve, in maybe up to about year 5, while they got a significant gain in the initial year that they invested in customer feedback, because customers probably felt positive that, oh, they care about me, they're asking me for my feedback. But after that, it's all about action. And their number flatlined for a number of years. And a new CEO came in and said, we're no longer going to just look at these data, we're going to act on them. And they, in fact, were really important in our business, in helping us grow our business by insisting that we create this action planning process. And so once they got to like year 5 or 6, if you look at the acceleration of their gain over the years, that's because they invested in action planning. If you go to the far end of the curve, in years like 18, 19, 20, that's where COVID started. And action planning stopped. And what happened when action planning stopped? Well, the numbers began to tail off because they were no longer making that intentional, formalized effort to convert those insights into real actions that would make a difference in the business. And so I think it's essential when you think about customer feedback to put it, frame it around this notion of incremental continuous improvement. Yes. Somebody had a question?
Well, Scott, I was going to say, we're like 6 minutes. Time flies.
Yep.
What I'm hearing is more thorough actual surveys than just NPS. And then the importance of having your team identify some actions we're going to take, and then execution kicks in. Did we do it? Did we not? Is roughly where we're at. And go ahead and flip to the next slide. That's good.
No,
Is
you're
that
you're you're absolutely right. You got to be a little bit more rigorous, a little bit more social scientific. You got to look at the entire customer experience in your surveys and insights, and you must have some form of formalized intentional action planning to engage the rest of the organization. It's as simple as this. You put together subject matter experts for each of the priorities the survey has identified. You put them in small groups in a room with a facilitator, and over the course of a day, you begin to craft a rudimentary action plan to address however many priorities your leadership has endorsed coming out of the insights. In most cases, there's 2 or 3 corporate level priorities, things that are important across all kinds of customers, across the entire experience. Again, going back to the beginning about not boiling the ocean, being selective in your priorities. But the action planning is not very complicated. It's just that it all too often is overlooked. I want to finish on a note of talking about problem handling. And as I look across the 35 years or so of doing this work, one of the top key drivers in every single industry, in every single survey, is how good or bad are you at solving customer problems and complaints? And so the RAGE study was a replication of the White House study that I made reference to early on, except we added a bunch of questions related to frustrated, hostile, aggressive customers. I gave a speech 2 weeks ago at the, the Coalition of Insurance Fraud. And the entire panel that I was on was triggered by what happened to the United Healthcare CEO. And that particular industry was beginning to look much more seriously at how they're going to think about customer feedback, how they're going to insulate themselves from some of the atrocities and tragedies that are going on in their particular sector, keyed again by that one example. So the RAGE study we've done, the 11th version will be released probably in August now, even though it says July here. I'm finding it a little bit hard to get enough time to distill all of that data. And we partner with Arizona State's Center for Services Leadership out of their business school on that study. And these are just a couple of the vital statistics that you would find much more detail on in the full report that you can either use the QR code or just go to our website, and I'll send you a copy of the 2022 study and the 25 study when it's released. But what's interesting about the study isn't just some of these alarming soundbite statistics that you see here. One of the things that I hope you would take away is that problems are the exception, not the rule. 3 out of every 4 customers responding to this survey said they had a problem with a product or service in the last year. And that has more than doubled since the White House study. So problems are going to be there. And the question is your business prepared to resolve those in a way that continue to engender customer loyalty and customer satisfaction? And I think if I were to give you one fact from that RAGE study to take with you very practically, is that most of your customers, well, I guess it's diminished from most at this point, many of your customers would walk away from a problem experience or a complaint with you and say, we got nothing. In the older days here, if we go back in the history of the study, it was like 1 out of 2 customers complained to a company about their most serious problem and said at the end of it, I got nothing. Or as my co-author would say, he's Jewish and he liked the Yiddish phrase bupkis, which means less than nothing. And so if you remember that the number one driver of complainant satisfaction is, did I get what I wanted? And you consider the fact that almost 1 out of 2 customers walk away from these complaint interactions or problem interactions and say, I got nothing. It's pretty alarming. We give customers in the RAGE study 13 different things, and we ask them, what did you want and what did you get? And you can see the kinds of things we ask them about, what they want, what they get. And you would notice, I hope, that a lot of the things they want have nothing to do with money. It's not that money is unimportant. It's not that getting the product or service fixed isn't important, but their expectations for how the problem will be handled are much broader. They include what I call non-monetary remedies or psychological currency, things like an apology or an assurance or a thank you, number 8 there, or number 10, to be treated with dignity. So I hope you would remember as you go about transforming your own customer experience that when customers have problems, they have a vast array of expectations for how you're going to solve that problem. The second thing I hope you'd see in this chart is the significant gap between the percentage that wanted it and the percentage that got it. And then there are some remedies that are much harder, apparently, to deliver, and probably especially hard to deliver in a digital fashion, like things like to be treated with dignity. Look at the percentage point gap between those who wanted and got this being treated with dignity. So understanding and proper diagnosis of what they want is essential. I do tons of interviews with Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Fortune, Atlantic, you name it. And they always want to know what's the most effective way to complain if I'm a customer. And I'll say you have to be persistent, you have to be kinder, and you have to know what you want. And it's just as important for a company to do that diagnosis and that information seeking around what they want. And the final piece of that story related to getting what you want and how difficult it can be to deliver what customers want is to recognize that when you are able to couple some form of financial goodwill, and financial goodwill could be money, it could be fixing it, it could be a little bit of freebie in the future, however it applies to your sector. If you're able to deliver some sort of monetary as well as these non-monetary remedies, that's where you're going to get the most satisfaction. If you look at people who only got money or people who only got an apology, their satisfaction with the action taken is comparatively less than those who got both of those things. So I know I've talked fast. I know I wish we would have had a little bit more time for conversation, but I want to make sure I gave you a full deck here of some information that hopefully will be of value to you as you go about growing your own business. Be more scientific in terms of getting the feedback. Doesn't mean you have to be academic, but you need to be rigorous and you need to be exhaustive around the entire customer experience. You need to accept the fact that it's probably better to set your aspirations around continuous incremental improvement over a long period of time. You have to have formality and intention in taking action around those results. And importantly, customers are going to have a lot of problems, and it would be wise to engineer a way of addressing those problems to make sure that they get what they want, which isn't always money. Let me stop there. I know we've hit the stopping point, but I have extra time, a few minutes, if people would like to stay.
Yeah, we're over time. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask Scott? Anything they want to talk about?
Scott, I have a question for you. Earlier, you mentioned that we should be exploiting the value that we provide. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a number of clients, like the example, the case study I was showing you, and I have some others across a number of different industries where their scores are really, really high now. They've gone through this entire transformation that I was describing visually. And when we do their surveys and collection of insights, which, by the way, often would include some one-on-one in-depth interviews with people and follow-up to the survey, etc. What we're doing is we're concentrating on what are the specific actionable things that our client is doing to create these great experiences, so that we're able to shine a brighter light on what are the things that make them most happy. Then we're also around that oftentimes talking about what are they not doing that the competition is doing. So I think those two kinds of questions, simple as they are, would be fine to incorporate into any kind of quantitative or qualitative survey where you feel as though the preponderance of your customers are really happy. But I also would push back a little bit and say the right kind of survey should be capable of exposing some of your warts. And while we didn't have time in a quick hour that we're talking today to go in depth on what that kind of survey looks like, most all of our surveys of clients are including an entire battery of questions asking them, did you have a problem? What was the nature of the problem? How effectively did we resolve the problem? Those kinds of questions where you seek out dissatisfaction, if you will, are essential in helping ensure that you're getting well-rounded feedback and you're not going to have surprises later on where, gosh, we missed this whole thing because we didn't really probe around some of the sensitive areas. I don't know if that's helpful too.
Well, I hear like in your marketing, then when Jamie goes to do marketing, could be Facebook marketing, posts, ads, and anything. If it ties to what made those people happy, that's likely to hit their decision points.
It certainly could. It certainly could. I'm not sure that I would be as strong around purposing these insights for external marketing purposes and through social media and those kinds of things. I'm sort of, and the reason I feel that way is not because I'm an old fuddy-duddy, but we have other data that talks a lot about the continued relevance and value of word of mouth, the old-fashioned word of mouth, recommendations from neighbors and friends and colleagues, and the distrust associated with some of the data that is being shared on social media, reviews, et cetera. I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that a lot of the things you read and see in social media through influencers and other things those are paid advertisements. They're not necessarily a valid reflection of what's going on in the market for that company or with its customers. So I think my main point was if you were to do some kind of feedback approach like we've been discussing, make sure that you have a question for you that says something like, tell us about the experience that's most delighted you. And that's one of the questions my colleague, John Goodman, favors a lot. But also I'd be asking about how do we compare to the competition and where are our soft spots and our vulnerabilities with the competition. I think those can yield some meaningful information if you're on the upside of your NPS or satisfaction curve.
Dude or Randy, were there? I thought Randy was off mute, but maybe not. Go.
I was just Scott, if we move forward to something, trying to get some feedback off of customers, am I able to reach out to you to find out maybe the right questions to ask for the business that we're doing?
Yeah, sure.
Like
sure.
I may think this is the question, but with your experience, I'm sure you could, maybe come up with a better question to get some of the answers.
Happy to talk with you further about how you might do that. Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other question for you, Scott. When you're doing the surveys, what is your target response rate?
So it varies by industry, and I'll say that in some industries, it's a lot harder to engage with surveys now than it used to be. And I'll just give you a quick comparison. Somewhere in the early mid 90s, I did a huge project for Ford Motor, sending out tens of thousands of surveys for all their different brands, the Ford, the Lincoln, the Mercury, the whole thing. In any event, the first question in that survey was about problems, and it said, have you had a problem? And here's all the areas you could have a problem. There were 80 problems on the first page. It was a printed survey, right? There was no internet back then. And I looked back recently at the response rate to those surveys, and on average, depending on the brand, it was between 25 and 30%, which is just struck me, given what I know from where we are today, how remarkable that response rate was for such a effortful survey that was being shared with them. Today, if I look at industries like a SaaS industry, we work with a lot of SaaS companies now, those response rates vary somewhere between 2 and 5%. If I look at some business to business environments where it's a smaller self-contained customer base, with the right kind of survey, the right kind of follow-up, the example being the company I showed you with the curve of perfection, their response rates in the latter years of their work were in the 70 and 80% range. Now, those are business to business, of course. But I would say to you that there are some tricks you can play to increase the engagement with the surveys, but it's a response rate of 5 and 10% can be just fine, so long as you have enough customers so that the data are statistically robust. So I know that sounds kind of wishy-washy, but response rates are on the decline. It's more difficult to deliver surveys via the web because of all of the policing of spam and blacklisting of people that send out surveys. So it's getting harder and harder to engage customers with surveys. But I think done the right way and with the right follow-up, you can get more than ample data to help you frame a business case for improving the customer experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm so grateful to everybody that you took time out of your day to talk a little bit, fast as I may have talked and as much information as I may have thrown at you. I'm happy, if you reach out to have a follow-up conversation, or if you'd like a copy of the rate study, you can ask for that too.
Okay, everybody good? Thank you all for being here,
Thank you,
Scott.
guys. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate your knowledge and sharing with us.
Thank you very much.
Listen to you all.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, go get them,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.